from the ghetto. Help us, Father. Oh, Lord. Mothers just hold them head on ball. And them woman stronger than a wall. A big pusher iron she daughter. Son in jail for manslaughter. Too bad for him, he a name bad boys. No bail, that's the black man's choice. Like Shadow say, poverty is hell. Hell is status well. Some say life is a cycle. But don't draw she no circle. Where will it all end? Only time to tell. Outside the siren keep howling. Inside your belly room growling. Police raid very often. Simpson measuring a coffin. One night in bed you're sleeping. Next night is a wake that you're keeping. So you're praying to win the lotto. Not to hear voices from the ghetto. Voices from the ghetto, crying, Lord, crying. Voices from the ghetto. We are not a forgotten people. Yo. With dented Friday soldier on. Revolutions, fake politicians born. And often their tragic story brings a journalist glory. No wonder they view the world scorn. From since the day they born, some call them rebels without a cause. These social victims of unjust laws, but yet they christen the heroes, renegades, desperados, forever knocking on heaven's doors. Hear me? Steel band music shatters the silence, harmony to conquer the violence. Big men run when cops approach, fighting for scraps with the cockroach. Young Turks, they're Turk protecting, almost every young girl expecting. So tomorrow begs to no borrow, there'll be another voice from the ghetto. Crying, Lord, crying, voices from the ghetto, crying.
Good evening, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. My name is Jomo Thomas. The program you're about to listen to is called Voices. This is the Voices program for December.
Hey, Jomo, I'm not hearing it just in case. Just check to see if
I'm not sure what's happening there.
Social amenities,
you're not hearing me at all?
I still can't hear you. I was hearing you before.
I don't know what happened now.
So if you can't stretch your dollar, it's later for you.
So I'm going to try go out and come back. Hello? Are you hearing me?
There's only bitterness left inside.
I'm still not hearing you.
I'll go out and come back. What about now, Kamal? Hello? Kamal? Kamal? Hello?
I was born and bred in the ghetto. I know what I talk.
Your mic isn't muted, right?
No, it's not. It's not.
Oh, okay. It's muted now, so unmute it.
Right.
I'm still not hearing you. All right, I'll just check on my end to make sure that it's not me. I don't know if the guests can hear you, but I'll just check on my end to make sure that everything is
Yeah.
active.
The sun rises slowly over the hills. Everywhere is cold and sunlight, but still, most life starters are crowded.
I don't know if anyone.
All right,
If
I'm
anyone.
hearing you now.
You're hearing me
I'm
now.
hearing you now. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Everyone, we apologize for that short break in transmission. I want to welcome all of you to the final Voices program for 2024. We want to apologize for last week because we didn't think that you would have the appetite to do Voices the day before Christmas or immediately before Christmas. So we scratched that with the hope that we'll come back tonight for the final program. Now, we have put together a team for you, which includes St. Vincent's preeminent journalists, in my estimation at least, Mr. Kenton Chance. We have Josie Gonzalez. Josie Gonzalez is a Vincentian national who lives in New Jersey. And she runs an outfit by the name of Public Square Amplified. And we also expect to have Mr. Dexter Rose. But Dexter is apparently running a little late. But Josie, Kenton, good evening. Hello?
Hi,
Good
good
evening.
evening, Joe.
Huh?
Good evening,
We said
Joe.
come out?
Good evening, Josie.
Good evening
and
to everyone.
Good evening to all of your
Hi, good evening.
listeners.
I wanted to bring you all on tonight because I wanted to talk for us to have a chance to speak about the year that was 2024 and to probably have you talk about what you perceive to be some of the more important stories. Kamal, I'm hearing a jarring sound. I'm not sure what that's about.
I'm getting a lot of static, Joe. I apologize. I don't know if I have to go back out again.
Yeah, maybe you should, and let's see.
Let me see.
All right.
You still getting the song, Jamal?
No, I'm not. So it may well be Josie's.
Yeah, more than likely. All right. Well, we know have Dexter.
Yeah, hi Dexter. Good evening. Kenton, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm not sharing any image because the lighting is poor. I just returned from Union and I didn't get time to set up properly, so I'm not sharing any image.
All right. So, gentlemen, Josie went out of frame for a little bit, so it's you and Dexter. Like I said, I wanted to talk for us to have a conversation about the year that was 2024, and for you all to kind of cue in on what you perceive to be some of the more important stories of the last year. Dexter, maybe you should go first. And you can try to take them one at a time. So if what you perceive to be the most important story and everybody can turn, we could have a conversation about that and try to bring the audience in, and then we see where we go from there. Dexter?
Dexter, I think you need to unmute your mic.
You gotta unmute Dexter.
I'm unmuted now. But I wanna do a counter proposal, Jomo.
Yes?
I haven't been exactly the saddle. I would have loved somebody like Kenton to lead, and I commence. I give way
All
to
right.
my once junior,
Kenton,
now very much senior.
let's let Dexter is proposing that you lead. I don't have a difficulty with that.
Well, I don't know if I should call it an honor or a task, but it's always good to be in your company, Dexter, and that of Jomo Thomas, two people who I consider to mentors of mine. I must admit to you that I'm not in the best frame of mind because I had a really, really long day. I just walked into my house like 10 minutes before the show time because I spent all of today in Union Island as part of the ongoing coverage of the impact of Hurricane Beryl there. So if I don't bring my A game, that's the reason. Um, in terms of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I presume to a large extent that we'll focus on St. Vincent and the Grenadines or matters related to or affecting St. Vincent and the Grenadines. To my mind, undoubtedly, the biggest story of the year was Hurricane Beryl, the immediate impact of Hurricane Beryl, and the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl. And I say that because this is a story that I'm still covering 6 months on, and I presume that I'll be covering for quite some time. Because I just came, like I said, I just returned from Union Island, and a lot has happened in the 6 months since Hurricane Beryl impacted the southern Grenadines. But there is still quite some ways to go there. So, to my mind, that is the story of the year, unfortunately. And Hurricane Beryl is a story about a storm. It's a story about climate. It's a story about environment, but it's a story about a lot of other things. It's a story about tourism. It's a story about construction. It's a story about building code. It's a story about resilience. It's a story about healthcare, about education, and it affects almost every facet of our society. The other big story in St. Vincent and the Grenadines this year, I would think, and also unfortunately so, is the ongoing situation with crime and violence in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, especially as it relates to the most serious of crimes, which is homicides. We've had so far, regrettably, 54 homicides, just one fewer than last year. And we have seen this story played out over and over and over this year. Unfortunately, we've had on average more than one homicide per week because we have 52 weeks in a year and we've had 54. Two or three of those are people who were killed at the hands of police, and they do not classify those as murders. I know Jomo, as a human rights activist, might have a thing or two to say about the classification of killings.
Certainly, I don't see it as a human rights person. I see it as a matter of fact, as a matter of statistic. The police do not have, as a matter of right, to characterize their shootings that result in death as something other than a homicide. It is for an inquest to so characterize. So this is why I've never bothered with the police's characterization that when they shoot somebody and that shooting results in a death, it is not a homicide. Because a homicide is basically a killing of someone else.
Indeed, it's the killing of one human being by another human being,
Yeah,
and
it is not
circumstances would
a
determine.
homicide is not necessarily a murder or
Yes.
manslaughter, but it's a homicide, and the police don't have. I don't know how they think they can arrogate to themselves to say that when they shoot a citizen, that is not a homicide. So that's why I never bother with that. I don't understand why people like you would follow them with that nonsense.
Well, sorry, do you mind repeating the last thing you said? What is not a homicide?
I said I don't know why someone like you
No,
who
before that part,
understands
I heard
what a
that part, but I
homicide.
wanted to, before I respond, I want to get the totality of what you said. You said something about that something is not a homicide.
Oh, I said a shooting that results in the death, whether it's caused by a police or some person under the color of law or any other citizen, is a homicide. And
But
consequently,
whoever said it was not?
no, but the police give the impression that
No,
what they do.
the police includes all of that is included in the statistics. We've had 54 homicides this year, and that number includes the people who have been killed by police officers in the execution of their duty.
All right, that's not how the police characterize it. But go ahead. We need not be detained by that.
Well, that's
But yes,
essentially what
I
what
take your point, Kenton. That there are these two issues. Maybe we should, maybe instead of allowing you to go on and on and on, we probably should have Dexter and and Josie respond. Dexter, you first. Kenton makes the point that Hurricane Beryl is certainly the most important story of the year.
Well, there is absolutely no disagreement in me on that because when I
Right.
just think of the top, see, I wonder if it's just my line. I'm seeing you guys going around in circles. Images will disappear. Should I take off the image and probably the bandwidth? Are you hearing me okay? Hearing me okay?
Well, you dropped out a little while ago, but
Dexter, I think it would help if you probably turn off your camera. It might help the bandwidth.
Are you guys hearing me? I just stopped my camera. See if
yes,
it
I'm
is
hearing you.
ease up in the bandwidth.
And may I also suggest,
You hear
Jomo,
that?
that when people are not speaking, that they mute their microphones. That way, it helps to eliminate some of the feedback that you
Right.
get.
So
Yeah, I turned my camera off because I'm seeing some buffering on my line. And I don't know if it's just
it's
today.
much better. It's much better
The
now. It's much better now.
now that I've taken my image off. I hope that would that's what contributes. Yeah, you all are buffering again. Anything else outside the hurricane? Because the hurricane impacted an island, Canawan, Myro, and the fact that even Kenton today is still covering that, and I expect you'll be covering that story for a while. It shows that the magnitude of that issue. We could go into detail and how it is handled and the rest of it, but that from the larger story, that definitely is the largest story, and crime undoubtedly affects all of us. And I expect we talk a lot about the crime issue tonight also.
Josie, Josie, are you hearing me?
I pause for now.
Yourself, Josie.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Thanks for bearing with me as I drive. I would, say that I'm very pleased that Hurricane Beryl is still a significant story and it's still covered. I think what it does is it has the opportunity to sort of expand a discussion around climate change, around resilience, and around emergency preparedness, which has been sort of a challenge, I think, just from my observation and my attempt to sort of have discussions around resiliency. And this is going back before the last eruption. So I'm glad to hear that it is. I'd love to sort of hear more about displacement, persistent homelessness, what it's done to the agricultural sector, what sort of funding and where the resources have come from, and who's on the ground doing the cleanup work or repair work or the resiliency work. I'm very curious about that. But let me just say, I'm very glad that it is, because we're not spending enough time, at least from my vantage point in the North, there's not enough time being spent on covering the impact of the climate crisis, and what that is doing, particularly to small island developing states. We see a lot of coverage from the Sahel region, from in the Pacific. We see a lot of that, and we see those prime ministers and those representatives being very sort of demanding around loss mitigation and other things. So I think that I'd like to hear more about how it's been covered, and I'm glad that it is a significant story still. So thanks. We covered it, by the way, Public Square Amplified. We covered it. We interviewed the Prime Minister around resiliency. We attempted to also interview the Prime Minister of Grenada. That we didn't get very far with that. I hand it over. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Kenton, I was saying that you raised a lot of points related to what you believe to be the related stories with Beryl. You talked about problem with the storm, the climate, the environment, tourism, construction, resilience, healthcare, education. Do you want to go in some more and tell us why you think all of those are affected in the ways in which you see them?
Well, and this Jumut, Hurricane Beryl didn't just affect the southern Grenadines, although the impact was worse felt there. I remember the day after the storm on July 2nd, the first place I went to was North Windward. And one could have seen there also the impact of the storm, especially on agriculture and the natural environment, though not as much on built infrastructure such as housing and bridges and what have you. But in the case of the southern Grenadines, where the economy there is reliant primarily on tourism in its various forms and fisheries, fishing. Let's say I went to Union Island today. A lot of the houses are still without roofs. A lot of the places that would have provided entertainment for tourists were not impacted by the hurricane, still without roofs. I interviewed a gentleman today who has a business place, and thankfully his roof is back on because his property was prioritized so that the government can use it for accommodation for people who are working in construction there. And he said sometimes he just wished he could cry. And at a point in the interview, I felt as if he was about to cry, but he did not. Because, he has his property, the roof is on. And I said, well, other people might be looking at you and say, well, at least you have a roof back on your property. And he said, well, at one point, this is what I was also thinking. When I saw other people with their roofs back on, I was thinking that at least they're better off than me. But he said having his roof back on, it doesn't feel any different. It doesn't really make a difference in his life. And why? Because he's yet to return to this sense of normalcy that he had before the hurricane devastated his business. He had a bar, he sold a lot of tickets and whatever else he was doing. And even though he has this space that has a roof on there, None of those things, none of those activities that used to take place there are taking place there. This is the height, the peak of the tourism season in our part of the world. And you go through Union Island, you see one or two people who meet the stereotypical description of a tourist. You see yachts around, but you don't see the hustle and bustle that you're accustomed to seeing or you would expect in a Grenadine island in the heart of the tourism season. On the construction point, Hurricane Beryl has laid bare a lot of the failings in our construction. Um, yes, I do appreciate that Hurricane Beryl, it was a storm of a magnitude that, it broke a lot of records in a lot of ways. And even the ways in which we might have built houses in the past that might have survived a storm, the strength of this hurricane was too much for those construction techniques and standards. However, we also have to admit that a lot of our buildings are not built to the minimum standard that is required to survive even maybe a category 1, 2, 3 storm, far more a category 4 storm of the magnitude of Beryl. Even healthcare facilities were severely impacted by the storm. So if we peel back all of the layers and if we, disaggregate things, we can see the various ways in which this storm has affected the many sectors of our economy, especially in the southern Grenadines. I spoke to one fisherman today who said just before the storm struck, he had bought wires and made several fish pots. But then when the hurricane came, all of those were destroyed, and he no longer has that. So in many and various ways, this storm has affected the lives of a wide cross section of people. I mean, the lives of everybody in Union Island practically, and Kanawan and Myro, which to various extents, they're at various points on the road to recovery from the storm. Joe.
On mute, Jomo.
Kenton, I was asking if you ever made it over to Carriacou to do any kind of observation, any kind of coverage at all from there.
No, I have not. I have not.
The reason why I ask, I don't know if you all paid attention to it. I had it as one of the stories that did not get a lot of attention. It was really brought to me by a gentleman some time ago, last week or the week before. He says, it's last week, he was giving me a ride, and he said, don't you find it strange that a boat with about 400 Vincentians had gone over to Carriacou for whatever they went there for 6 months after the storm, and there is little or no activity on Union Island, which, like Carriacou, was in the eye of the storm. And I wondered if that says something of the pace of development that had, well, not redevelopment, but reconstruction that had taken place in Carriacou, which we had not seen on Union Island. And as a consequence, the people who evidently must have planned this trip for some time, they said, well, look, we're not going to cancel the trip. We're going to go over there. You all thought in any way that the importance of that story in the way in which the gentleman played it out or talked about it or looked at it?
Well, if you're speaking about the excursion that they had to are you speaking about the excursion that they had to carry?
Yes, where the boat was stranded for some hours.
Well, the truth is, I'm not too sure what is the story behind that excursion, whether it was just an entertainment event or what have you, or if there was any link to it and this song. I'm really not sure what the story is behind the actual decision to go to Carriacou.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah, because Josie, you were saying something? Second.
Well, before certainly there's a question around how decisions are made, right? Because that's a decision around safety and insurance and coverage, right? So who allows such a trip to take place? Because those lives could have been in danger, and it would have there would have been sort of would compounded what had already occurred with Hurricane Beryl. I'm really curious about to date, because it's been some time. Has there been an estimate on a rational estimate on what it would cost to do baseline rebuilding of not just the islands, but also in areas on the mainland that have been devastated, especially the agricultural sectors and the natural environment sectors? Has there been a presentation on what it would cost and sort of the time frame?
The government has been talking about some of that, what it would cost. I don't have the numbers, and I don't know if either Dexter or Kenton. Kenton probably has been following these stories because that's his take literally every day. So he may have some information. Kenton, do you have any estimate as to what the government said all of this would cost? Or, well,
The rebuilding?
yeah.
I'm really not sure. I heard the Prime Minister said before hundreds and hundreds of millions, but in terms of a precise figure, I can't recall one.
It's
Well,
always
yeah,
hundreds. It's always
yeah.
hundreds of millions.
It's always, that's what I was going to say. It's always hundreds and hundreds, right? So heads of state say that, but sort of what a rational number is, and and who gets to, and I don't know what the emergency preparedness unit looks like. I don't know who does that work, but have they identified sort of the most critical or the priority areas where people have been, people's homes have been devastated, people's livelihoods have been devastated, and done an accountability on that? Because I think that's sort of like hidden story, right? So we can talk about hundreds of millions of dollars to repair, and then we can talk about we can have small stories on individuals who participate in the tourism sector, but has a school that was completely demolished and the children moved to the mainland. What's happened to those schools and the pupils in those schools? How are they being taken care of, and where are they getting their education from? So issues like that, sort of the average person. So where are people living? And so these small stories, I think, are really important and really significant because they tell the bigger story about the impact of climate change, and particularly for small island developing states, what that cost would look like, and how are people sort of building a future, a resilient future. So I'm really curious about this.
Yeah, Josie, while you're at it, most of the audience would know Kenton Chance. They would know Dexter.
Yes,
I
knowing of
see.
that.
I see
Sure.
Marilyn Monroe, Marilyn Valentine is asking. She wants to know who is Miss or Mrs. Josie. So maybe you should tell us a little about yourself. I tried to do that
Sure.
earlier, but people may not have
So,
heard.
I mean, I'm a Vincentian. I am still very much a Vincentian. I live in North America, in the U.S. to be precise. I'm a publisher, a founder and publisher of a local news organization, and we cover a variety of issues from police brutality to climate change. And we spent a lot of time this year, and actually, when we talk about sort of the national stories or the stories from our perspective, we've done a lot of coverage on the war in occupied Palestinian territories, the impact on women and children. In fact, one of our stories won first place award for covering the Palestinian protests. So I am photographer and journalist and editor and publisher. It's a small news organization, and it's based in New Jersey. We are about 3 years old. Prior to that, I was not a journalist or a publisher. I taught nonprofit management and political theory, and wrote and did other sort of nonprofit consulting work around building nonprofits, and so that's a
Right.
that's a
Thank
bit,
you. Yeah, thanks.
if that helps.
Dexter? Dexter?
Were you trying to get me to introduce myself?
No. I mean, everybody knows
Oh.
you, Dexter. I want you to contribute to what we're talking about.
I'm not too sure. Well, the storm and the whole issue of building, and especially in the Grenadines, begs some questions. The question of insurance. I have heard, I have no proof of it, that most of the, maybe the majority of buildings there were not insured, and that one has gotten the impression that people there don't really bother with insurance. It brings me on to another thing. Not that I'm knocking anybody. Brings me to another thing. Are there building codes? Are there building codes, and should we not have building codes?
We do have building codes, Dexter.
We do?
Yes. This is why a lot of times when people are trying to build some things without going to physical planning, some state personnel show up and tell you, look, you got to stop. You have to get permission before you can do that. I think a lot of one of the question though is, and I think Kenton alluded to it, based on the intensity of the storm, is there a building code that can protect the roof from flying off unless we lock the roof in, the galvanized in? I mean, a lot of that is done. Somebody told me that about 75% of the roofing in Jamaica, for example, is concretized, or the galvanized is locked into the concrete. So it's very, very difficult to rip it out. So those are the kind of things that we have to do. But in light of the fact that we're having more and more ferocious storms and hurricanes, the question of building, I am not so sure whether we can do what needed to be done to protect against that kind of ferocity of a Category 3, Category 4, Category 5 storm.
Well, Joe, but what's happening with climate change, it beholds us to rethink every way which we did everything before.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not, you're not saying Beryl is a game changer. The game has long changed, but just that we are playing catch up. And a lot of times we all operate as though we just hope that nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
go ahead, Dexter. I'm sorry.
And then from another issue, this whole issue of the which people can discuss, and I'm sure there'll be discussion on that, the role of government in the whole rehabilitation, in recovery, rehabilitation, rebuilding process. Because can any government realistically?
Yeah.
Josie,
I think that, yeah. So I mean,
jump in there.
I think we often, particularly in sort of the outside of the G20, right? So we often sort of try to, or we assume that the state has all the power. We assume that the state has all of the ideas. I think what, particularly in the Caribbean, I think we have to begin to figure out the role of citizens and building power and leveraging that power. So making demands on government and participating, not when I say demands, this is not about, like calling out sort of mistakes or errors, demands on building a resilient plan that is transparent, where citizens, farmers, rural producers participate in it, by scientists participate in it, and that it is a transparent plan. So when the volcano happened, I was assigned to do resiliency work by a North American organization. And it was really difficult to sort of connect with folks, also because I'm not on the ground, to connect with folks, government and non-governmental folks, outside of a small group of sort of farmers, Joylyn and Lennox, to think critically about how do you build resiliency hubs and in the larger conversations that were taking place where Camilo Gonzalez and the Prime Minister and other ministers participated, these discussions are being led by climate and disaster companies based in Europe and based in the US, and they will lead in the conversations. I am suggesting that on the ground, citizens have to begin to build sort of an NGO, build a role for citizens to participate in the conversation around resiliency, because one, climate change is going to have more devastating impact on small island developing states, particularly in the Caribbean. We're going to see it. Fisheries are going to be devastated. You're already losing ocean fronts. It's going to have a greater impact on the agricultural capacity of the island. I don't think you've built back since the volcano. So this has to be a public conversation, public charrettes, where citizens are participating in it, scientists are participating in it, and that we own. When I say we, I should sort of step back because I live in the North. That the data that is being collected and analyzed should be owned by a public trust that's run by citizens in St. Vincent. That's my recommendation. So I'm speaking from having participated in building resiliency work around when we in New York, when we had Hurricane Katrina and then we had Hurricane Sandy. I was part of a resiliency group of quite a number of citizens and NGOs that got together and built plans around public budgeting, infrastructure development, and clinical responses, right? So I think we have to. I think I would encourage folks, and I'd love to participate in it, but to begin to think about ways that this conversation becomes more public, and so numbers become more public. So we have rational ideas about what it takes to rebuild. We have rational ideas and agreements on that we're not at the level where we're going to be able to build homes and buildings to weather these growing storms. I think this is an urgent conversation that we should have more of, and so that's what I'm more.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of conversations that are taking place, and all of it taking place almost at the same time. As Kenton pointed out, there are so many angles from which we can look at the impact of Beryl. But I wanted to ask this question to all of you. Over the last 4 years, we had COVID, we had the volcanic eruption, and then we had Beryl. We had COVID beginning in 2020. In March of 2020, we had the volcanic eruption in April of 2022, and we had Beryl on July 1st this year. Now, question, which of these do you all believe was most devastating, most impactful on the nation, on the economy, on the people? Don't you all speak at once, but somebody can jump in.
I nominate Dexter.
Dexter, you're nominated. Run with it.
It's a very interesting question, Jomo. It's a very interesting question, because I'll start with this. The hurricane has impacted maybe a smaller part of the country, but the impact, because the part of the country which lives and generates a lot of the tourism, and the impact on that is going to be felt in the economy. But on the other hand, the volcanic eruption, everybody felt the volcanic eruption, and which had an amazing impact. But going back to the Beryl has impacted our agriculture. We are now seeing things like we importing things like oranges. We just beginning. I had a mango today, and that was a rarity. I
But
bought the breadfruit.
mangoes are out of season, Dexter. Mangoes don't come in until like about July. June, July.
When
That
we
is
had a
not true anymore, Jomo.
well, that's the point I'm going to make. And I bought a breadfruit just before Christmas for $15. This is a country where breadfruit has been your go-to when nothing else there. You get a breadfruit. Poor people have to be walking past breadfruit. Breadfruit is almost becoming almost a status thing because you can't afford to buy breadfruit. When I bought this breadfruit for $15, this was a big looking, nice looking breadfruit. I was giving a lady I met in the road a ride, and she was going to buy one too because it looked so good, and then she came back to the car angry at the ridiculous price that's being pinned on that. But that is happening with a whole lot of other things. We had, as a result of burial, we've had scarcities of things like lettuce, which normally would have been lettuce usually would have been knocking down the place. We had crops that people don't realize normally that, well, you would expect it at Christmas time these things will be coming in, but they all were impacted.
But would the volcano not have had a bigger impact on those kind of cash crops
The volcano
rather than burial?
The volcano affected a lot the plantains, but those most of I might be wrong in this. A lot of what the volcano affected, that's where it's going to come and affect the economy on the end, because you had all people who were exporting plantains. Everybody knows seems to be doing plantains. Banana's gone, and there's a good price of plantains, and the volcano affected a lot of that, a lot of the agriculture on the whole. I don't know if it's being spoken about enough or if people are listening enough, but people are feeling it, I believe, in their kitchens and in their pockets.
Yeah, well, clearly, I think that we have had a rise in price. I bought 5 bananas today for $7. But that is a function of the fact that most of the bananas were blown down and they're only now coming back. And the vendors are milking that to the best we can.
Yeah.
So even Josie, even before his soul on Josie. So even as we are beginning to recover from the volcanic eruption, because for instance, bananas bananas like a pregnancy. It takes 9 months. Even when we're beginning to recover from the volcanic eruption, there comes in burial and devastates everything again. Josie, you're saying something.
Oh, sorry. Yes. I just don't think you can separate them out, right? Because I think to do an assessment, you would have to look at the economic capacity of the island prior to the most recent crisis, right? And that's the volcano. And when the volcano eruption happened, a third of the agricultural capacity was devastated in certain the richest parts of the island. These things compound each other. One, you have to look at capacity, and two, you have to look at whether or not you're building resiliency. But these things are happening one on top of the other. And so are you recuperating from the last one? Are you preparing? You were preparing to absorb a second. So I don't think you can separate them or choose which one. You have to look at overall, what was the economic capacity of the island right before the volcano?
I don't think that we are asking that to be separated. No. I'm just trying to say we had 3 of them back to back.
Yeah,
and the question is,
yeah, I would think the volcano eruption because you lost so much agricultural capacity, and it goes to what Dexter was talking about, right? So where are the farmers and who's supporting the farmers? And if we're no longer living off of the land and we're importing food, what's going to happen to one, to the agricultural sector and farmers, and two, nutrition? Where we're going to become, not we, but in America, we're consumers, right? It's all about consumption. And hyperconsumption is a big commodity in America and to some extent in Europe, but not as big as America. And so are you going to become hyper consumers? That's going to be that. I think that's a conversation to start having
But
now.
we are hyper consumers already. Our food import bill is hundreds of millions of dollars.
That is a crime, actually. That should be considered, and people should see it as such, because you have to have some capacity. And I mean, my father taught. My father would say, as growing up as a child, my father would say, "Josie, if the banana man don't eat, nobody eat." And I think that still resonates in his point. And today, so if you're importing at hundreds and hundreds of millions, and then you need hundreds and hundreds of millions to repair, what are you going to choose? People have to eat.
Gemma, if you permit,
sorry,
if you permit me to say something on this, right? I think about the impact of the economy. I think what we've had is just one natural. Well, the COVID wasn't a natural hazard, but in terms of the volcano and the hurricane, is in a sense is like a layer on a layer on a layer. And we had COVID-19, and we know the impact of that was widespread. The tourism sector was affected, production globally was affected, prices went up, and all of that. And then we had the volcano, and I think the volcano affected all of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to various degrees. In the northern third of the country, the volcano red zone, we had a lot of infrastructural damage to houses and to public infrastructure, and also to other buildings privately owned but used for public purposes, like churches that were damaged or destroyed. At that time, the government committed to helping people to rebuild or repair their houses. And the volcano erupted in April of 2021. And then a full 3 years later, we had Beryl. But we must remember that when Beryl struck, the government had yet to fulfill its promise to repair or rebuild the houses that were damaged by Beryl. So we had, that situation being compounded by what has taken place in Union Island. And if the government is to make true of its promise to help every person who needs that help to rebuild or repair, that is going to take a very, very long time. So I say that to say that each of these phenomenon has had an impact on the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to various degrees and an extent, like in terms of the spread of the impact. But ultimately, because we're all in a national economy, we are going to feel it, because, like, for instance, we can think about St. Vincent Island proper, that to a large extent, we weren't as affected as the Southern Grenadines, but a lot of the tourism dollars that come into this economy, they come through the Southern Grenadines. And to the extent that as many people are not able to go to some of these places, or for instance, yachting tourism, I don't think that and I would have to see the numbers, but just based on observation, I passed through the Grenadines today. I looked across at Salt Whistle Bay, and it was packed with yachts. I mean, Salt Whistle Bay is not a place that I go to frequently, so I can't say how it compares to what I might have seen in previous years, but it was very encouraging to see that so many yachts are there. But the question is, to what extent are the people of Myro able to provision these yachts? If you're speaking, Jomo, you need to unmute. I can see your lips moving, but I wasn't hearing you. To what extent?
I was saying they normally come in the year to spend that the end of the year, bringing the new year with us in that area.
Yeah, but notwithstanding.
But I take your point. Point.
So, and then the other thing is then, to what extent are we able to provision these yachts? Like, for instance, this is a tropical island, and a lot of tourists like to eat tropical fruits, like bananas. We've had this conversation about bananas all the time. I mean, At my house, we eat a lot of bananas, but we haven't eaten many over the last few months simply because they are unavailable. And I mean, I have a tendency to think that when a fruit is in season, it's cheap. You eat a lot of it. So it's highly unlikely that I'm gonna buy seven bananas for five
Five
bananas
bananas,
for
$7.
$7. But I must admit that I bought 10 for $10 a few a few months ago, a few weeks ago. Um, but the thing is, and this goes to show how how the economy is interlinked. So like the fruits, we can't get the the fruits that we need to sell to the tourists who are coming here. So then the tourists are not leaving as much of their money as we would have as they would have before. So yeah, each of those, the COVID-19, the volcanic eruption, and Hurricane Beryl, they have each unfortunately made their mark on the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
My interest
So,
with the question is that I find that if we look at the handouts or the government's attempts to intervene, it seems as though the government is making a greater national intervention in terms of what is given away now than it may have done for COVID or for the volcano. The point Kenton made is a point that eluded me, and that may partly help to explain it. That, in a sense, none of the government's commitments were completed with COVID or with the volcanic eruption, and consequently, what we're seeing now is probably an uptick on what should be done, what ought to have been done. But it just appeared to me that a lot more seem to. It appears as though a lot more is being done now than even with COVID and with the volcanic eruption, when, from all indication, those seem to have had more devastating impact on the economy.
Well, I think part of the thing is that the impact of burial and the fact that, as we said, it is layer upon layer. No sitting government could could remain if you're driving at 20 miles an hour, recovering from COVID and the volcano. You couldn't continue in the same mood and mode with the Grenadines being affected, because while a lot of people don't realize it, and Kenton made the point, a lot of the money that comes into the economy comes from the Grenadines.
From the southern Grenadines, in
From the
terms of what?
Grenadines, from the
How would it
Grenadines,
made?
from the Grenadines. You go to Beck and Kenton mentioned Southwest a bit. I was down there sailing a couple months ago. Not in the wasn't the heart of the tourism season, and there were lots of yachts there, mega yachts also. So in that part of the tourism here is almost constant. What you get to know, you get a lot of the snowbirds now coming down. You get a lot of the snowbirds coming down, run away from the winter. But the nature of our tourism is always there, and that's the importance of the Grenadines, and we gotta manage it and care for it carefully. So government had to, and maybe I haven't been down there, Kent. I haven't had the chance to go to Union Island, which I know quite well on my road. But probably there needs to be more urgency in getting that back up. I've got a friend in Union he's into the dive business, and when I spoke to him after the storm, I mean, it is the guy was a ghost of the person I knew, because it's not something you can rebuild in a month or 2 months. And the tourism season is back on now. Joe, you need to unmute.
In addition to the rebuilding, Dexter, the whole question of the mental health devastation that might have taken place from that experience.
Not might have, that happened. People are traumatized.
Yeah.
That is something I can comment on because I asked one of the community leaders about that today, and he was talking about the stresses and strains on people and people's ability to cope. And I think I've had the unfortunate experience of covering quite a few natural hazards across the region in Dominica, BVI, Bahamas, Haiti, and that is too often one of the elements of the response and recovery that is overlooked when people are in circumstances that they're not accustomed to. Your house is destroyed. You're living in emergency shelter for extended periods of time, and just the natural environment. I remember in Dominica a few years ago, and I think most of us who know Dominica, we know, like most Caribbean countries, Dominica is lush and green. And then when the people look up at the hills and they are stripped of the vegetation, it was having a serious impact on them psychologically. And I think that is something that we need to pay some more attention to. Like I asked somebody today, I said, like, churches, for instance, are the churches having like open air services to just go, and preach and sing and whatever, and these things could help people to cope. And the person was saying, well, I think the people in even the people in the churches, they're so stressed themselves, it's difficult for them. But this also speaks to a larger issue in the country, where we do not have adequate mental health services, psychiatric services. Well, what I'm speaking about this storm is, psychological service and psychosocial services. But at the larger level, we don't have that. And this is something that is extremely important. I mean, when somebody is telling you, look, before I had my roof on, I was thinking that the person with their roof on is better off than me. I got my roof on and it doesn't feel any different. I understand, how they feel now. It tells you something about where they are in their minds, and they need that sort of support. Like people would tell you, look, we would just get
Another important point. Another important point about the grenadine, which somebody brought to my attention a few months ago. She said, in the Grenadines, we have a shortage of rain. And since July, people in the Union and much of the Southern Grenadines dread the rain, something that they would have welcomed a few years previous.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true, Joma. And that's one of the things, one of the points that that was made to me today. We all know, those of us who know the Grenadines, we know it's a water scarce area. They have no rivers or streams. There are some wells, and then you collect water from your roof from the rain, and you channel it into your cistern in your homes. That's how they collect water. And generally in the Grenadines, when it rains in moderate amounts that do not result in flooding, then people are happy. But today I was there, and I spoke to the MP at the harbor, and he was saying, "Look, look at those clouds. It looks as if it's going to rain." And the reason why people don't want it to rain, because most people don't have roofs on their on their houses. They have tarpaulin, and it's not the heavy duty tarpaulin. So after they've been on there for a few weeks, and the wind takes them, they get ripped up. And but the flip side of that is that we are now into the dry season. Officially, we're into the dry season. The dry season starts on December 1. And we know what the dry season can be like in St. Vincent. And we know what the dry season can be like in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we know what the dry season can be like in the Grenadines. So now, when the rain is coming, the people dread it because it's going to create problems. They have to go and mop where they have mopped. They're thinking about flooding and all of that. And the rain is going to go everywhere except where they want it to go, into their systems, because they don't have roofs, they don't have guttering. Some people are saying that the government needs to make available like a lot of those black tanks that they had at they were stored in Otley Hall and I think other places. So it would be really, I think one of the stories that I might have to be covering in the next 2 or 3 months would be the extent to which the extent of water scarcity in the Grenadines and how the authorities are able to respond to that.
All right, I'm not so sure how much more we can go with this, the burial story. So unless you all have another critically important point, I want us to segue to the issue of crime, we have on the penultimate day of 2024. The official number of homicides is at 54. We saw in the last few weeks, sometimes we're getting, 2 or 3 persons dying in a weekend. We certainly have not gotten to where our neighbors in Trinidad and Jamaica are. But Trinidad, I saw had 659 homicides when I checked at midday today. And as a result of that horrific crime situation, they have declared a state of emergency. But interestingly enough, per capita, Trinidad's crime situation is like about 4,400,000 because Trinidad has about 1.5 million people, which is about 15 times more than the population of St. Vincent, whereas we have about 100, 110,000, if that many, but we have 54 homicides. So I just wanted to put that kind of flavor in there and to hear you all talk about that and how it's impacting on our society.
But Joe, let me comment. Kenton has been following these, and I've been saying, I've been mulling over this, where the police have become body collectors. And it saddens me the way each time some young man, because usually a young man, there was a young woman or two, a young woman among them, but it's usually a young man. The way we have been just counting numbers, so it's a numbers game. But this isn't lotto. You're talking about the son, a young father, his life being destroyed. And what saddens me and worries me also is the way a lot of us have become desensitized. It doesn't scare us. It doesn't scare us. So it's like, it's not affecting me because it's not as though we're hearing you on back streets and you're getting shot and you're robbed. Well, a guy got shot in back street, but we all sort of surmise that he was involved in something that is not, it's not random. Yeah. So that has given our society a false sense of security or complacency, and that is very sad because it's no longer alarming. I see.
You think so? You think so, Dexter? You think so?
No, I don't think so. Because people are counting the numbers every day like oh.
Because there's a different number to count, but I don't think that is a sign that people are not concerned at all. I think people are increasingly concerned.
No, I'm not saying people are not concerned, but I don't think with that number, if you say you compare with Trinidad, it should have all of us scared. We should be scared to go out, and we're not.
Well, I think one of the reasons why we are not all scared is because, as you correctly said, the crime is not yet random. In Trinidad, people go out still. People still go out and do all kinds of things in Trinidad. They're preparing to have carnival soon, and they are going to have carnival. So it is not like if the society has collapsed or closed down, because a lot of it is gang related. In Trinidad, it's a little more out of hand because some of the shootings are in public places where people are gathered and other innocent bystanders are killed.
And that is beginning to happen here too.
Indeed. Well, I don't know if we have had anybody who was gotten killed, except the story was that the guys, remember the 5 persons who were shot in Paul's Avenue on July 19 this year were quite innocent people just standing there. Some of them, I think, had been living abroad and came home, and they were just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, I happened to have been talking to the father of one of those, and he told me, you know, and it's, but it is very worrying. It's very worrying.
Kenton, Josie, are you there? Kenton?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Go ahead, Kenton.
Jamal, I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't even know what to say with this murder thing. I mean, as a journalist, I approach it dispassionately and I cover it as a not just as a story. But you know, I mean, with every life that is lost, regardless of how horrible the person might have been in the estimation of some people, there is somebody or the other for whom that person was the world, and somebody who's mourning the loss of that person. And
Absolutely.
it's a really horrible thing to live in a society where people feel that if they have some, some issue, some disagreement with somebody, you can just pick up a gun and go and shoot them down in the most cavalier of manners and just walk away pretty much without any repercussion. I don't know how many people saw that video, and I don't want to traumatize anybody, but of that young man who was shot and killed in Rose Place, the sanitation worker. I mean, how somebody just, just to see somebody's life just taken from them, bam, is in a fraction of a second. There's a man there living, sweeping the street, and the next few seconds he's on the ground. His body is just spasming involuntarily as whatever little life is left in him is drained away. I mean, it's a crazy thing to happen. Just before burial, I think it was on June 30th, and that was overshadowed by burial in Otley Hall. A man was driving a van, and then he went to the area where he would turn the van around to go back into Kingston, and somebody just came and just shot him down, just like that. In Harmony Hall, there was a case of a man who's in his house in the pre-dawn hours, and somebody went into his house and shot and killed him. In what police said they believe was a robbery. I mean, there's so many of these cases. I mean, over and over and over. And I sort of agree with Dexter's view. It's as if, and even now, I would be honest with you, it seems as if all the media is doing is counting the numbers. I think we've gotten to the stage where it seems it's just counting the numbers, because sometimes you can't even get enough time to even write a story about this murder, to write up a proper detailed story, because
But
before you
Kenton, I think one of the reasons why we appear to be simply counting numbers is because there's very little breakthrough in terms of police apprehension. So time and time again, people get shot, nobody get arrested, nobody get charged. So we have had hundreds of persons, upwards of 500 in the last 12 or 13 years. But if we have 50 persons, I'm not saying that we have 500 killers, but if we had 50 persons, or let's say 100 persons apprehended, that would be a lot. So that, I think, is the problem. And all the criminologists would tell us. Remember when Tony Harriet was here? He told us that one of the ways in which we kind of get a handle on that is that we have to let the citizenry know that there's somebody is engaging in criminal activity. That person, there would be detection, there would be arrest, there would be charge, there would be trial and conviction. But if you don't have that, you're going to have, as I think you said, a very cavalier approach where people are now, it's the brazen nature, I think, that is frightening to a lot of people, that increasingly more and more of these persons who are engaging in criminal activity are thinking if they want you and they think you are going to be in front of the barracks, they're going to police headquarters, they're going to be daring enough to come and try to take you out there, because the hope is that the police will not be able to make the arrests. And
and
if the people are beginning to think that the police are impotent, or the police may not make the arrests, and I'm not here blaming the police for not making the arrest, because the police don't know that an incident is going to occur. The police is really literally chasing the ball at each turn.
But Jomo,
Yes.
what it angers me also while this is happening, there are people who are playing word games about whether it's a gang and whether they're gangs. I don't care whether they're organized gangs or disorganized groupings of persons and all. This is something that is so important, should be shocking our society. And
Yeah.
the security apparatus from the top, from Minister of National Security to the police, are involved in this game about definitions. I don't care about definitions. I want to hear now about forensics. I want to hear about solving. You know, solving a crime isn't going to stop crime. But we want people
Yeah,
want.
but it may convince people
Well, of course,
that
you can't be so
crime
brazen.
does crime does not pay. If your apprehension rate is high, let's take for example the guy who killed the health executive, who's alleged to have killed the health executive in New York.
Uh-huh.
They tracked that guy to Pennsylvania and arrested him.
Yep.
I mean, it's a more highly sophisticated society, a more monitored society, a more red society, and everything else, and they were able to track him even when he went into the subway and wherever else he went. But unless you are arresting and apprehending and charging and trying people, many of the persons who are committed to committing crime are not going to feel deterred because they're going to think they have a good. It's like young people who think that they can't die,
Of course. Well,
so they engage in all kind of reckless activity.
it also worries me too that in this thing, I have come to the conclusion that our ability to really detect is severely limited.
Yes.
And I'm saying we have relations with, I'm going to be bold, we have relations with Cuba, where forensics is a proper science and they solve crimes there. For some reason, we mightn't want to do it because maybe if you go to Cuba, people would think that the big bad wolf might say, no, you're going to the wrong people. We have relations with the United Kingdom, with the United States, with Taiwan. Where is it? Are we not seeking assistance from them in terms of applying science to this? Because don't tell me you're going to depend on people picking up any phone and calling any police officer. The base too small for that. Nobody's doing it.
But I think though that some of what you're talking about is happening. That they are going to different places to try to get assistance. I believe the problem, however,
but you have personal information the public doesn't have them.
Problem, however, is that you don't have the kind of, I think in the United States or in the United Kingdom, for example, you have a higher incident of crime solving because they have very, very high-tech forensics, and these societies are more surveilled than our society. In a place like Cuba, you have a greater buying of the population to protecting their block, their street, their town, their country. So remember, people don't talk about it now, but one of the things that has helped and protect Cuba over the years from all kind of different activities, including criminal activity, is the Committees in Defense of the Revolutions. They have people block to block surveillance. And these people are not necessarily police officers. They're citizens, they're patriots who are looking for the protection of society. In St. Vincent, we have the police are alienated from communities. Many communities see police as an occupying force. Many people frown on police, roughhouse tactics, police brutality, police aggression, police arrogance, and all of this in many ways impact our ability to solve crime. Compounding that, I think, is the fact that so few of these crimes are solved that people are afraid that if they were to come forward and to lend support to the police, they too may be targeted. Although we haven't seen any, I don't know, we haven't seen much of that in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but I think that drives the fear.
Nobody wants to be the first to see it, though.
Huh? Well, the police have said that one of the things that they're going to do is the witness protection program. They're trying to develop that to make sure that there's greater protection for persons who come forward.
Unfortunately, in such a small space, it'll be difficult to convince anybody that that is going to work. If I disappear from my block for 2 weeks, everybody would know. That must have been Dexter who, and and you disappear for 2 years, and you see your family there. We're not in a position to really carry out a program like that effectively. It's so sad.
I agree with you, Dexter. And I mean, how many people would want to disrupt their lives in such a way?
Well, I can tell you all, as somebody who engaged in criminal defense, we have that kind of program now. We have the program now where, for example, persons are sent abroad under protection situations. And this is going on for more than a decade, where witnesses are sent to other countries, to other places, and they give the evidence, the person gets locked away in prison, and they stay where they are. There's now greater use of the an anonymous bill that allows the prosecution to bring in a witness whom the defense don't know who the person is. The person comes to the trial, you don't see their face, their voices are modulated so you can't recognize their voices, and so on and so forth. All of those things are being done now.
Very commendable.
So, well, I mean, I'm not sure. I am not sure that it is proper for, except in cases where there's serious organized criminal activity, for you to bring me in the docks and tell me that there's somebody who's going to come and give evidence against me, but I don't know who that person is. I don't know whether that person may have a motive to want to sink me. That you don't know the person's voice, you can't see the person's face, because one of the cardinal rules of democratic free society due process in criminal prosecution is that you have to be able to face your accuser. And if you are doing this and I can tell you literally every case now, the director of public prosecution in St. Vincent is asking that this person, there's some kind of protection. For the most, I mean, so there's a tension there that I think that we have to deal with, but certainly we have to address that question.
Jama, we have a WhatsApp question here.
Yes.
Someone is asking, is the police reactive or proactive in relations to crime? 2, does the organization operate as a service or force? And 3, are there local intelligence police officers in operation?
Service and force, intelligence. And what's the first one?
Is the police reactive or proactive?
Reactive.
In relation to crime.
Okay. Anybody want to take a stab at that? In many cases, they may be reactive unless they can crack some group, some organization. I'm not sure we had that level of sophistication where.
Well, sorry, Jim, I agree with that being reactive. That's the reason I said police have just become body collectors.
Yeah.
You're never going to be able to prevent. But I said if people can see some, and it must start with a unified approach that the public knows that you're not wrangling over foolishness like whether it's a gang or disorganized or whether it's high maintenance. No, that kind of foolishness have to be sorted out at the top. So the public would know this is an organized you have organized and disorganized crime, but we have an organized crime fighting and solving machinery that's going to deal with criminals.
Yeah, Ashish, Ashisia Sam. I hope I have that name. I hope I'm not butchering your name, Miss Sam. Is saying, and it's a point I've made time and time again. The police need to foster a good relationship with the public. The public and the police can work together to solve crime. I absolutely agree with that. As it stands now, I don't think the police have a good relationship with many of the communities that they swear to protect and serve. Consequently, they don't have good intelligence upon which they work.
Jomo, we have a caller.
Oh, thank you. Yes, let's get a caller. Caller, good evening. It's time for your voice.
Good evening, and I know you have limited time, so I'm going to be as quick as possible. Give examples from local, regional, and international when it comes to police and by extension law enforcement officers. I remember a police officer at a cricket match at Annisdale telling somebody you can't give everybody rights because it's going to be chaos if you give everybody their rights. A businessman, a Jamaican businessman based in California, he hired an ex-Jamaican police officer at his business in California. And he said the ex-police officer told him that we are trained to create fear in people, in the public. Internationally, law enforcement officer was in court, Queen's Courthouse. There was a court officer, he was giving some instruction, calling people's names and tell them to see him if they hear the name called. So some people were in the back talking, and he went back there and tell them, shut up. So one person said, man, I'm not a little child, don't talk to me like that. He said, listen, you open your mouth again, you go in handcuffs. This is not a democracy. You will do what I tell you to do. And that's my contribution today. Bye-bye.
Yeah, Winston is saying the question if it's a force or service is equivalent to if there are gangs or organized groupings. And his view is that it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the next.
Jomo, we have somebody trying to get in for the longest one.
Bring them in again. Paula, good evening. Time for your voice.
Good evening, Jones.
Hi.
Hello?
Go ahead.
You can proceed. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Adolfo Stelflesh.
Yes, sir.
Let me just speak to the question that somebody posed earlier. Whether the police is proactive, reactive, or whether a service or a force. Now, it is both, it ought to be both proactive and reactive. Because you have to have systems, you should have systems in place where you can prevent crimes. That is proactive. But in the event where you're not able to prevent, you should at least be able to detect and solve. That is reactive. You can't be 100% proactive because you'll not be able to prevent every crime. But I can say, from my experiences, I have known where proactive actions was positive and prevented crimes. Prevented murders, prevented burglaries, prevented rape. I know of that experience.
Right.
Not the reactive part, where we were able to prevent it, but it was able to be solved. I know of that. As it relates to force or service, I don't necessarily think the word force or the word service could make any difference. Trinidad have service, but the people in Trinidad complain from time to time.
Right.
The police are high-handed.
Yeah.
I think once you are committed to protect and serve, it doesn't matter whether you're a force or you're a service. You won't force or service is being used. You just do what you're trained to do, is to protect and serve. So it doesn't make a difference with me whether it's force or service. As it relates to crime solving, You have always said it, and I have always said it. I'm a firm believer, because I know from my training, every crime is intelligence driven. No matter how much forensics you have, there must be an element of intelligence there. The source of intelligence comes from the public most of the time. So you have got to foster a good relationship with the public. There was once a deputy commissioner who said the police is the public servant and the public master at the same time. You got to know when to be the servant and when to be the master. So it's all about, you have to build that. Then when you build that, the public will get confidence in you and nobody will be fearful. I strongly believe that. When you have a good relationship with the police, people come forward and let you know, well, this is what happened. There will still have the unanimous people here, but with the strength of the population, with the police backing, I feel we could do a better job.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But I don't want to carry on forever. I'll stay there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm in total agreement with that. I don't think India makes a difference. I think it's the relationship which the police develop. I know there's a lot of talk about community policing. Community policing is not just police presence. Community policing is not just the police high command going into an area and having a manifestation an afternoon or morning. Community policing is where there's a conscious decision on the part of the police to engage people in communities and to build community buy-in, get people to understand that the police are there to serve them. And the police cannot give the impression that, look, I don't care whether you respect me, as long as you fear me, that's good enough. And I think a lot of that has happened in our police, with our police department. Historically, it's not something that happened yesterday. But I think as the police become more and more armed, the police become increasingly brutal. And that is not a good thing if they want to get a handle on crime.
Jim, I wonder, you mentioned, I wonder if it has something to do with it, with some element of training, because we have gone from the days when, as you would know, when we were younger, we used to call the police pigs. It doesn't happen anymore. I find that there's quite a cordial relationship between a lot of police and the public. Yeah. But there's an arm of the police that, for some reason, think that they must act in a brutal manner, and there's no need for that. You can be strict. You can be strict in carrying out, because you're the law officer. You can be strict and principled without being brutal, and people would understand the difference.
I totally agree with that. But how do you all think? I mean, the police, for example, have been saying for a long time that one of the best things that can happen to them is for them to get a forensic lab. I don't know how much a forensic lab would cost, but it would be interesting to hear, to see, like in a new year, the police high command drop a plan and say, look, a forensic lab would cost us $5 million. I mean, there was a time when the government wanted to get a shooting range. I don't know how much a shooting range costs, but they put in a shooting range. There was a time when we wanted to update our cricket facility. We spent, depending on who you believe, $38 or $50 million to develop our sporting facility. So I'm not so sure if the police says that a forensic lab would be central to their work. Excuse me, Dexter?
I think Josie's trying to come in. I think
Josie?
Josie's trying to say something.
Okay, yeah. Come in, Josie. I'm not seeing her. I think she dropped out.
I saw a message from her just now there. That she was asking if she should drop out.
Yeah. I think, let's see. I don't know. I'm not seeing her at all. Tell her to try to come back in.
Yeah, I saw a
I'm not.
message from her a while ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Ah, she's in. Yeah, she's in the
She's
studio.
in.
Mhm.
But I think that's a big problem. I think if you notice, and there's on the chat, a lot of people are agreeing that that relationship is central. Doug Howard is saying the police in St. Vincent are very disrespectful, and you know, Miss Sam talked about how you need to have that relationship with the police. If you do it, it can help. How do we change the culture? Max wants to know. How do we change that kind of culture?
Jomo, changing culture takes, well, I don't necessarily, it takes some time, and it takes, I think in an organization, it takes deliberate efforts to change culture. I get a sense sometimes that some of the senior ranks, they, at least some of them, they understand where they want to take the force and how to correct some of these issues that they have. But I'm not sure that maybe some of the middle managers and the junior ranks, who are the ones that people interact with the most, understand, buying, or support where some of the senior officers are trying to take them. And I also agree that in some instances the junior ranks are just following the advice of the senior officers. Sometimes I also get a sense that the political directorate or members of the political directorate purposely play the police off against the public and vice versa when it's convenient for their political ends. But at the end of the day, we have to take the long view of things and not just act in a way that is expedient in the short term. Because when we have a justice system that is so dependent on witness evidence, then it really helps for the police to have a really good relationship with the police, with the public. I remember ACP Bailey making a point last week that when police turn up to a scene and there are people there, you don't just tell them moo moo moo," and in a kind of hoggish way. I'm not too sure if he took the point this far, but for instance, if something has happened and then the police respond and there are civilians there, and you speak to them in a discourteous way, especially those because a lot of times, like the first officers who arrive on the scene, they're the ones who are just going to secure the scene. They're not the ones who are going to actually investigate whatever has taken place. And if they treat the civilian population in a particular way, when the investigators come, the civilians who already treated poorly, they say, "Well, I don't have anything to say to you," and
Yeah.
it really does not help.
The other thing, and I heard the ACP Bailey making this point some time ago on radio that police officers cannot only demand respect, they have to give respect. And I think that is central, that you can't curse the people and then expect that somebody may not curse you back. And if they curse you back, you can't then get brutal because the police have a central role to de-escalate situations rather than to carry it up the escalation ladder. But I'm not so sure that how much of that training goes on here, or how much the police are trained to believe that, look, I have control. I tell you to do something, you better do it, or I am going to show you who's boss. So those are big problems. But certainly, I think it is reflected in the fact that we are not solving. We are not solving many of the. I have been practicing here. I've been practicing law since 1995. Practicing the U.S. and I know I did cases where and I don't intend here to compare, because New York is a city of millions. It has tremendous resources, and the police are well resourced. But you get all kind of forensic evidence that come into the court. In the years that I've been practicing here, I have never gone to a case where there was any kind of fingerprints used. I've never done a case where there's any serious forensic work, forensic evidence being presented to the court. And a lot of times it is an attempt on the part of the prosecution to play onto the minds of the jury that, look, there's a lot of crime. The evidence, even if it's not ironclad, there's this notion that this person or that person should be found guilty of an offense. But I maintain that unless you're going to have serious relations with the people, we are not going to get very far in terms of solving many of the serious crimes that confront us now.
Jomo, we have two comments here of similar nature on
Sure.
the first one, someone writes, we have a top cop with a PhD in forensics here and another young lady who studied similar field. Can't we form some strategic alliance regionally and internationally to set up and help with setting up a lab? Furthermore, why not make it mandatory to have fingerprinting system in place once you apply for a passport or an ID? And the second one is given that the Caribbean educate people to the degree level, who takes them to the skill set outside? Why don't they open a crime lab in one country to cover the Caribbean working 24/7, thereby keeping qualified people employed? Respect is earned, and it is not a right.
They have labs, They have a lab in Jamaica. They have a lab in Trinidad. They have a lab in Barbados. But you have to remember, those labs are national labs. Those labs take on the crime situation, and they may get priority if for a crime in Barbados, in Trinidad, in Jamaica. So something coming from St. Vincent or Grenada or Dominica may have to wait. But I believe that we have to get to the point where we get the lab. Here's a comment from Desiree Jack. She says, Japan has a Koban system. Their approach uses a neighborhood policing model with small local police boxes, quote unquote kabans, where officers are embedded in the community. They focus on crime prevention, knowing residents personally, and solving minor disputes before they escalate. This system has successfully contributed to Japan's extremely low crime rate and strong police community relations. We have to try to find a way. We have to try to find a way to get it done. But I don't think there's any other way than good police community relationship. You cannot brutalize people and expect them to be your ally. I mean, you may get a snitch if you have him compromised, but you can't build your crime prevention on cultivation of snitches. You have to have ordinary citizens saying to you, believing in you, willing to come forward, seeing you as an ally.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
we can.
I'm not sure why we're trying to develop a culture where we see the police as a friend and an ally.
You know what?
I'm not in agreement with this community policing. We've seen what community policing has done in societies across the world, right? The police is designed designed to protect the state, designed to protect property. It is an arm of government. The idea that somehow we can develop different relationships with a particular entity of a state arm to be somehow different is problematic.
No. Hold on. When you say problematic, what do you mean? Are you saying that the people are separate and alienated from the state?
if you're not developing and training a society to understand and to see protection of freedom of speech, all of the human rights that that belong to each citizen, if we're not sort of developing that and holding police accountable to human rights of everyone, that's a huge challenge. Before that, there's also the discussion around crime and what is crime, right? And then there was a piece, I got cut off like 20 minutes ago. There are several pieces I wanted to hit. The idea of surveillance and the idea of being of training, right? So who decides what a crime is? Who decides what training looks like? What is the purpose of the police? How do you identify crime? And how do you approach it? These are all questions I think we have to grapple with before we begin.
But help us to grapple with them rather than talking around the issue, because I think that in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I think that in St. Vincent, we know the origin of police forces, we know the origin of the state, we know what the state does. But certainly, if you have, as in St. Vincent, 54 homicides in 364 days, and you're trying to get a handle around that, you propose what?
Project, right? That is public conversations, public meetings. That's a different piece than ongoing policing and the role of policing. And if you're
But isn't that what we're talking about, though?
Well, no, you're going back to the 54, right? So that's a special case. Now I'm here. I've heard conversations around surveillance and who's doing the surveillance and who's doing the data tracking and who's doing the policing. So what is nascent to the island itself? Who's providing the training? Who's designing any of the tools that police are using? And who's training the police? So
but Josie, you're giving us taking us in a very esoteric conversation as to who is designing. It matters not who trains the police. If we're talking about, hold on a second. If you're talking about detection, I know the politics of the state is central, but if we're talking about homicides, if we're talking about societies being ripped apart, then the fundamental question is how we are going to get a relationship between police and society that allows police to get the actionable intelligence, which may stop them, which may help them to cause us to stop mayhem from jumping off in a particular community. And if they don't, I wouldn't talk much longer. So just give me a chance. And beyond that, the question then, if the incident results in somebody being injured, harmed, killed, then the police should have a way of getting in there, finding that person, arresting that person, charging that person, bringing that person to the court, and have that person incarcerated. The whole question as to the role of the state and the function of the state and the origin of the state is, to me, another conversation for another time.
I think it's directly related to why you have
how so
increase, because this is not unique to St. Vincent. You're seeing increasing in crime rates. You're seeing the different kinds of the relationship between the police and you're seeing the police becoming more brutal. You see the police having.
What do you think is the reason why the police are becoming more brutal? Reason or reasons?
The role of the
part
police.
Of it is that we don't have a lot of psychological training for our police.
Yes.
Because we don't have the resources sometimes to do much of a psychological training. And I don't know if there's any psychological training at all. But why do you think that is the case, and how does that impact on our policing?
Which case?
Our situation, what we have now.
I think we're seeing crime rates across Haiti.
I don't think there's any argument about that, Josie. In Trinidad, in Jamaica.
Yeah,
but I'll give you this example. In Grenada, in 2021, they had 4 homicides. In 2019, they had 13 homicides. In St. Vincent, we had upwards of 30, right? And in 2022, we had 42. In 2023, we had 55, and now we have 54. So there's something else that's taking place, and it couldn't be the nature of the state. Because if it is, we couldn't explain Grenada, the difference between Grenada and St. Vincent,
I think
or the difference between St. Vincent and Trinidad.
Yeah, I think you're going to see it change in Grenada. I think what's happening in Haiti and what's happening in Trinidad is not distant from what you'll see in the other smaller islands. I don't think it is.
No, but why?
The economics has changed. I think economics have changed, and I think the relationship with Northern culture has changed. The way in which people see their access to resources has changed, and how they can get it. I think it's a lot easier. I think the tools of the violent tools that are being used, though, that has changed. It's easily accessible. Those things have changed.
Anybody else want to comment on this?
My own view is that I think, notwithstanding the reason behind the police and the reason for the existence of the police, I think it's in the interest of the society. Well, I think it's in the interest of Vincentian society, in the interest of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for the citizens and the police to work together to fight crime.
Well, I would think so too.
But in what way are they doing it? And so when we talk, somebody talked about having a PhD in criminology, right? So we know that the research shows that the public has always has been an unreliable source in identifying crime. We know that
no, that is not true. We know what the science says is that identification is not the most reliable. But this is not to say that witness identification is not a central part of solution to crime.
And which is what you're using, because you don't have the science, right? So you're using the community to identify criminals. You're using the community in a relationship with police where it's a familiar relationship. That becomes, I think, problematic unless you're providing proper training to the police and to the community about the role of the police and the way in which it comes together. I don't see that that's going to interrupt the escalating murder rates. Without that, I don't see how it's going to interrupt it.
One of our listeners, Marilyn Ballantyne, is saying the Grenada situation is different. I would like for her to tell us why it's different, because I've been grappling with this for a number of years. I've spoken to some of my friends in Grenada. Some people have said that Grenada, over the last 40 years, 44, 45 years, was one of the most gun-ridden societies. You make a revolution in 1979, you had thousands of guns there. And then in 1983, you had the American invasion. So you had heavy weapons, machinery, people being killed, in the scores of people being killed. And that may have sworn Grenadians off guns. In fact, many of the persons who were killed in Grenada are killed with knives and cutlasses, as opposed to here, where the vast majority of our people are killed with
guns
as a result of gunshot wounds. But I'm not so sure that the impact of the revolution, says Marilyn, makes the relationship between people and the police different. That may be.
I think the history of the revolution still lives. Yeah, I'm in Grenada.
Well, there's no argument for me for that, but I don't think that is sufficient an explanation for what is happening there.
I think you have to agree with you. I also think that Grenada is not far behind what's happening on the other islands.
But how could it not be far behind? And they have 18 homicides this year, and they have had very low numbers over the last 15, 20 years compared to escalating homicides in St. Vincent and Trinidad and Barbados.
We also had a very long time. We also had low numbers.
You also had what?
We also had low numbers in St. Vincent for a very long
When?
time.
When?
Oh, a decade ago, we had low numbers.
A decade ago.
If you get
No, I don't think you are conversant with the numbers when you said a decade ago.
No,
We have
it's
had over 500 homicides in the last 13, 14 years.
I know it's not that high. I'm
That's what I'm
looking.
saying. That's what I'm saying. You're not conversant with the numbers. But
No,
anyway,
I know.
we have Dexter. You want to come in quickly because we have about a minute. Then Kenton, you can come in and then we close it out.
Jamal,
Hello?
I just said that I do believe that a more cordial relationship between the police and the public will go a long way. It doesn't mean the public, I've seen it, let me just say, I've seen it in Cuba where I lived a long time. I lived and worked I studied there. I went back and worked as a diplomat. And I've seen where the collaboration, where criminals get outed very quickly. You mentioned it before. The Committees for Defense of the Revolution is not defending a revolution, it's defending your community, where everyone feels it has a stake in what's happening in your community. Criminals don't feel that they could be coming to you become a bad man and everybody respects you. No, you get outed very, very soon. Short time. I'll wrap here. And thanks for having me on this.
Oh, Dexter, thank you so much, man. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Kenton?
Jomo, I just want to, just very quickly on the conversation between you and Josie. Between 2012 and 2013, there were 408 murders in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I remember those are
Really, I didn't
murders.
that much in my research, but thank you.
Those are murders and not homicides. I just want to thank you for this opportunity. I regret that I wasn't able to prepare better, and maybe some of
No,
my
that's all right. I mean, you did well. I didn't expect anything less from you. Thank you. Thank all of you who communicated with us on the internet. Thank you who called in. Those of you who sat at home, didn't call, but listened to us for 2 hours, we are grateful. There are so many other things that you could have done, but you decided to stay with Voices for all of this period. Remember, read. Pay close attention, because what you don't know can kill you. Until next week, this is Jomo Thomas saying good night from Voices.
WeFM 99.9 presents Voices, a talk show that's not just new, it's phenomenal. Voices, it's interactive and thought-provokingly different. Voices, hosted by Jomo Thomas. We'll analyze all the issues of concern.
All right, Dexter, thanks.